What's up guys, welcome back to another video by clip on my YouTube channel, and in this video I'm gonna cover some of the YouTube myths about Psytrance kicks and the basses. When I started making music 20 years ago, I needed to learn through the manuals of the software, and this was the only way how I would get to some information. Today we have the YouTube, which is covered with educative material, but I must say that finding the right information in a sea of incomplete and wrong information is really hard today. So we started organizing the Psytrance retreat in Cambridge, UK. That's gonna happen from 25th to 27th September, and after we finished our website, we started planning our marketing strategy. In order to find on which videos and channels we should advertise our retreat on, I went into my YouTube analytics and I found one really interesting section there. This section showed me what are the videos that viewers of my channels are also watching. So as I was curious, I started checking these videos, and even though I'm risking to sound cocky and arrogant, I must say that I was shocked with how much incomplete and false information those videos contain. I will not mention videos and channels that I was watching, but I will try to complete or to correct the information which I saw as an incomplete or incorrect up there. As well, I'm gonna point you to some videos in which I promise you will learn so much. So let's move to the first one. Psytrance baseline envelope. In one of these videos, the creator of that video implicated that every time we are doing the synthesis of the bassline, we need to set envelope so it closes just on the end of each 16th of the note. Of course, I will take the example of the rolling bassline in one note only, and in that video, the creator stated that it's really important that every note closes before the next one starts. I completely disagree with this, as generalizing a certain processes as a must is a big no-no to me. If I learned something in these 20 years, I learned that following the subjectively created rules can only push you away for getting some really interesting results. In a matter of fact, once I started breaking these subjectively created rules, I was getting better and better results. As if we generalize a certain processes and we repeat them every time, we are gonna get similar or exactly the same results every time. The biggest advice that I can give to you on this process is that we should learn as many tools as possible, as many processes as possible, and use them as a possible solution for a certain occasion, as well as learning what exactly each plugin is doing and how it works, and use that knowledge as a possible solution for a certain occasion. So in this project I have the kick and the bassline, and the bassline is a higher one in B. So for now I'm gonna stay in this one, and I'm gonna show you how does affect the change of the envelope. So in this project I'm using the Rapture for synthesis. Basically it is all the same like all others. I just find the best sounding results with Rapture lately because the sound of the filter is completely different. It is the same synthesis with the two filters, LP2 and LP2. As you might know already, I'm using double filtering with two LP2s because that way I can create a completely two different envelopes on the filters, and I can control how much of the pluck I will have in the first filter, and I can control how much of the body I want to clear in the second filter. And the third envelope is the amp envelope, and don't let this confuse you. This is a start point, attack point. This is where sustain starts. I can create another one and then I can create release, but I don't need it for now. And I'm usually having something like this in Rapture because now with right click we can create as many dots as we want in the envelopes, and there is no need to use the LFO. Alright, so keep it like this. Let's hear how does it sound. So like this, I have a bit closing envelope on the amp, and I have a pretty much open cutoff on a body filter. It's around 220 Hz. And now if I open all the way sustain up, I like much more the results like this, as there is this warmth in the low mids or in the area from 100 to 200 Hz, and this gives some kind of a warmth to the bassline, and I really like how it sounds. This will be only the one way how to set up the envelope, but let's say now that I want to use the open envelope all the way up. Now the area from 100 to 200 sounds a bit dirty, but I can fix that by going to the second filter, and now I can reduce the cutoff, for example, to around 100. I can change the envelope as well. Let's say I like the filter like this. or something like this. And then if I go to the amp envelope and if I reduce, again, it's a completely different result, but I like much more settings with the open sustain. So, there is not one way, there are so many different ways. I can even play with the first one. So how we should set the amp envelope can also be affected by how did we set the filter envelopes as well. And when we combine all of that with what we want to achieve, again I'm coming to the conclusion that generalizing certain processes as a must is a big no-no, as there's so many different possibilities. And this is the opportunity to have a different settings from track to track and not having the same results every time. How we set the amp envelope on our bassline, it will affect the groove of the whole track on a bigger scale, and it will change the groove of a track. So in some occasions, in certain tracks and situations, the chopped bassline with each 16th closing before next one starts can be a good fit to your tracks. While in some other cases, the fully open sustain can be much better solution. There is also a difference in the key root notes, and different key root notes have their first harmonic position on a different frequencies. If we take the B as the example of the higher notes, then the first harmonic will be just above 60, the second harmonic will be around 120. And if we compare that with the C sharp, where the first harmonic will be around 34, the second one around 68. So once we process our bassline in B, we might want to boost the frequency of the first harmonic because its position is a little bit in a higher frequencies, and that way we want to compensate the lack of the lowest frequency. And the easiest way to do that is to open the sustain all the way up, and that way it will provide a more low end and the bassline will sound more full. While in C sharp, because of the position of the first two harmonic is pretty low, if we bring the sustain a bit down, it will reduce the level of the sub-frequencies in a C sharp, and it will reduce its power, and that way it's going to fit to mix much better. There are many other ways how we can reduce the level of the first two harmonics, but the easiest one is at the beginning in the synthesis. So back to the groove of a track, I will take two different examples. Let's say the Vini Vici, they mostly use these chopped ones, where each note is closing before the next one, and it's causing the groove to have this more rhythmical bassline, more powerful in a way, more plucky with the lost low end. And from the other side, we can take the example of Aja, where you can hear the Aja basslines are sounding like all three notes have the sub level, like a sine wave just going beneath it. So those two examples are in completely two different grooves, but both of them you can use as a possibility for making your tracks. In other words, my advice is that you try both open sustain, closed sustain, and see what suits better to your tracks. Another thing is that just setting the envelope in the synthesis so it close at the end of the note will not prevent the note for overlapping with each other. This will be the case only if you're not processing your bassline and if you don't use any EQ on your basslines. In order to prove my state, I will need to explain how the EQs are working, but since there are already two videos which can give you all the information you need to know about the EQs, I will just put the links below and you can check them after watching this video. For the purposes of this video, important information is that both regular and linear phase EQ will cause the pulse remain. In other words, after you apply the EQ on the bassline notes will extend, and this will cancel the amp envelope settings because it will extend the signal after the envelope. So let's do some testing, and I have the same settings from that video. So I have one saw oscillator on, LFO connected to the level, attack 0, hold 0, decay, sustain. It doesn't really matter because now with the LFO 1 we are affecting the level of the oscillator 1. Then I set it to envelope to 1/16, I turn on the filter, and I use the envelope 2 to control the cutoff of the filter. And as we can hear, the note stops exactly after 1/16 ends. So let's hear it in the project. Okay, let's bounce this one. As we zoom in, we're gonna see that there is just a small tiny piece left, but we can say that it does close after the 1/16 of the note ends. But we're gonna continue further on and adding some plugins in order to process our bassline, because this is the main reason of this test. So the first thing I would do, as usually I do, I will start inserting some of the multiband plugins, let's say C4. I'll just increase the level of this bass line. Alright, so I'm gonna bounce this one as well. So now if I add further on, let's say M Saturator MB, which I love using as well. It's a multiband distortion and saturation, so I will set it something like this, for example. And I'll just play with the settings. Okay, let's say something like this. Let's bounce this. Lately, I don't know why it's happening, but when I designed the basslines with Vital, there's always this kind of a delay, even though I'm setting the phase exactly on 180, which is supposed to be exact spot. And if we move that back, we can still see that there is a pulse remain. The main point of this is that now if I continue, I will always add at least 3 of them. So let's say Trance X will be the next one. Something like this in order to get this pluck effect. So if I bounce it right now and I correct this delay that is happening, we can see the pulse remain is getting higher in amplitude and that every process will extend our notes a little bit. So if I move further on, for example, let's add the Pro Q3, I will add the low cut, 18 dB per octave. Something like this. I'm gonna start reducing some of the frequencies, which I usually do around 300. I'll maybe bring a high. Again, I am mixing the bassline in an empty project and I do not advise any of you to spend too much time in designing bassline and doing the EQ and everything in an empty project because it really does not have sense. I'm just doing this for the purposes of this test. Now I will cut some frequencies, some of them I will boost, I will use higher Q, I will use smaller Q as well. So I'm just trying to shape it a little bit, so I use a little bit more of the EQ because this might be the case after all, after we finished everything and mixing. Okay, let's see what's happening with the signal right now and after I correct the latency that it's causing. So now we can see the pulse remain is getting bigger and bigger. And now we understand that setting the LFO as an envelope on the level of the signal will not prevent the notes to overlap. So we see that everything that has something to do with the EQ will generally extend the signal and it will cause this pulse remain. Now another thing, as I already showed in one of the previous videos about the bassline, I'm using 2 filters. And if we understand that filter is nothing else than low pass filter on the EQ, just modified with the envelope. So now I will set another envelope to this filter again, and now I'm again using an EQ to modify the sound of my bassline. Now I will set the different settings for a different filter, of course, and now I will reduce it a little bit more. And I will set the filter to the parallel, so I will set that filter 2 goes after filter 1. And now I can bounce this one as well, and we will see that there's going to be even more pulse remain, and further on, the more we process the signal, the more notes will be extended, because there's a certain things that's gonna happen with the phase as well, but I'm gonna keep that for the next video. So everything that we do with the EQs will cause the pulse remain, and this is the first result and this is the last result. So by setting the envelope to end of the end of 16th note in the synthesis will not prevent the notes for overlapping. And the best way, if you want to prevent notes for overlapping, after you finish the synthesis of the bassline and processing, you bounce the notes like this. You set the length of the notes exactly 1/16 and then add a little bit of fade out. Now we can set the rolling bass line, we can do a little bit of reduction of the first note, And now, one important thing is that if you want to keep it this way, you should not use any processing further on, because every EQ will add a little bit. As you were able to see, if you use a bit more of the processing, again, the same thing will happen. Because every processing with the EQ will cause the pulse remain, both natural and linear phase. In some cases, it can be higher, it can be lower, it can be longer, it can be shorter. The main conclusion is, again and again and again, we shouldn't make the decisions by our eyes. And the biggest skill that you can gain is train your listening. Because of the audio production complexity and because of the confusion we might get after spending so much time in the studio and not getting the results that we want, we're gonna start looking for an easier solution, and we're gonna try to make our tracks and sounds to sound better by our eyes and following some rules that we believe are gonna give us the results that we want for our track. But tell me this, are you following all the rules and still not get the results that you want? The best decisions in audio production we're gonna make only by listening and not by looking on some fancy curves and following subjectively created rules. This might be another rabbit hole, so I'm not gonna go in details, but there are so many reasons why you shouldn't trust your analyzer. If you are keen to learn everything I know about Psytrance kicks and the basses, there is a full class uploaded on my website. Now, the secret for setting the amp envelope does not exist, and as I said before, we should play around with the settings until we find what suits the best for our music. Another thing is that amp envelope is just one parameter and one part of designing our bassline, and it will also might depend how we will set our amp envelope, regarding how did we set our filter envelope and which type of the filters did we use. The answer is that there are no easy ways and solutions, and we should play around until we find the settings that suits the best to our music. As this video already took me a lot of time in rewriting, re-recording and editing, I will break this topic into two parts. So I covered the first myth, and in the next video I'm gonna cover the next one. And I would like to thank all of you for watching, and I really hope that you like this video, and see you soon with another video. Bye.